next principle that we're going to talk about for advanced training uh, is greatly illustrated in 1 Samuel chapter 17 in the story that leads up to the famous story of David and Goliath and that confrontation. You remember the story where David goes and he kills Goliath and becomes this champion, and they defeat the Philistines and so on and so forth. But it all started with some interesting events that led up to that. And so if you have your Bibles, and first, I hope you do, 1 Samuel chapter 17, I want to look at verse 20 through 22. 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting with verse 20, going through verse 22. I'm going to read it. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle, for Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. This is the story of where Jesse sends David to go bring some food to his brothers that are soldiers in the Israelite army. He's just the shepherd, and he's sent with food. And because of this trip, he sees Goliath taunting the people of Israel, and that's the events that precede this heroic tale of David defeating Goliath. But it started with a couple very important people that might seem very insignificant, but without them, none of this would happen. So David is going to bring food, some supplies to his brothers that are on the front lines of battle. And it says, first of all, he left the sheep with a keeper. Someone had to watch the sheep so that ultimately David could go kill Goliath. The keeper of the sheep is a very important character in this story who did a little thing that had a huge impact. I want you to understand that the little things that you do have a much larger impact than what you may realize. Your little attendance to detail to make sure that, I don't know, chairs are set up, a smile at a new person that comes in the door. You never know what those little things are going to do. They're going to have an impact on a larger scale that not only you get blessed, the person you help gets blessed, but the whole ministry, the whole church, the body gets blessed. This person who watched sheep made it possible for David to kill Goliath, and he wasn't the only one. Another one that seemed a seemingly very insignificant role, but this story could not have happened without. Verse 22, when Israel or David is witnessing some things with the army, it says David left his supplies in the hands of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. So another translation says the carriage keeper. He left the guy who watched the sheep and the guy who watched the stuff. Those two guys doing a relatively small thing helped make the story possible where David killed Goliath. There is no small role. There's no small role that's insignificant to God when we are serving God and serving one another. It's making possible things that can change the world, and that's what happened. So these guys, the keeper of the sheep, the keeper of the stuff, are the kind of the unsung heroes of the story of David and Goliath. And so the first principle that we're talking about in the advanced training video is the principle of cover and move. And I'll explain what that means in a second. And then the other thing that I want to do in this advanced training video is give a little more detail concerning engineer company, because there's some engineer company principles that I think that kind of echo this theme. Even though if you're in engineer company, you're going to go on and watch the other advanced training videos as well. I'm going to try, as these advanced training videos are completed, to feature each of the companies and talk about them so that you can not just appreciate the company that you're in, but the other companies that are going on, which is also part of the principle of cover and move. It's not just about you. It's not just about your little group, your little ministry within a ministry. It's having a big picture of all the things that God's doing, all the different people that are doing things that maybe not you don't even see that are going on, but it's important and it's helping you accomplish your mission, whether you see it or not, and having that appreciation for the bigger picture of things because it'll help you do better as you help uh, the church accomplish the bigger picture as well. So the principle of cover and move, what does it mean? Well, it's a military concept, and that is when you're under enemy fire and you're trying to accomplish your mission, you're trying to get to an objective. Maybe you're trying to rescue hostages. Maybe you're trying to take ground in the battle. You're trying to advance your army, right? So, in the principle of cover and move, or maybe you're trying to do a tactical retreat, whatever. But the principle is this: if you're under enemy fire and you have to move, because guess what? In life, if you're under enemy fire and you just sit there, eventually you get shot. So, you need to keep moving. That's a spiritual principle that's important. But if you're under enemy fire, the principle of cover and move in battle is that somebody is firing back at the enemy to distract the enemy so that you can take a new position, so that they're ducking and dodging, so that they don't get shot, to give you time to get to your new position. So, what does that mean? A lot of people in life, when they go solo, they go their own way, do their own thing, is they're trying to advance against the enemy and nobody's got their back. Guess what? If nobody's laying cover fire for you, you're that much more likely to get shot. You're that much more likely to get taken out. So the principle of cover and move is don't forget your team. Don't forget the people around you that are there to help you accomplish the mission. Don't just think about little old you because you end up getting shot. Understand that there are people that can be laying cover fire so that you can move. And guess what? Instead of just sitting there, okay, it's not my turn to move to a new position, you can be also, with that same mindset, be one of those people that's laying cover fire so that somebody else can advance. And if you're just thinking about you can get shot when you try to move. You're just thinking about you're helping somebody else get shot while they're moving if you're not laying cover fire for somebody else. So that's principle of cover and move. How does this apply in non-military terms? Well, here's some examples. Over the years, with nearly 20 years that I've been involved with, it's more than that, but nearly 20 years since I've been a pastor, there would be constant conflict between departments. There'll be these wars of between like Club Genesis, between what the youth department used to be called 180 in those days, between the main church and adult services activities, and between Shama and young adult activities, where we'd have to use the similar space. And there was often a time where rather than saying, hey, we're using the same space, how can we help and be a blessing to one another? The typical default response is not how can I bless everybody? It's like, I don't like Club Genesis using my stuff. Who moved this? Who did that? And since we're using the same stuff and our goal is the same, right? We're all the church. We're all trying to do the same thing in a different way within a different department. It'd be better rather than fight and compete. And in some cases, there'd be some resentment, and on purpose, things would be made difficult for another ministry because you're annoyed with them because somebody touched your stuff. Then what you're doing is you're hindering other ministries, you're causing strife between other ministries, and you're hurting one another over petty stuff. And I've seen this happen over and over again. And maybe you've seen that kind of thing happen too. Wouldn't it be better if it wasn't a competition? Another thing that happened, years ago, we had this conflict between, there's always conflict with musicians. It's just a thing. But we had the Shama band, our young adults band. The guys at the time started to get kind of a big head because if you're you have a platform, it's easy to get a big head and think that because God's moving, it's because you're so great. And so there became this platform where there was this band that was created, and that from the Shama band, because it was a platform to be in front of college students and things like that, that that developed into a band, and they started traveling and doing their own ministry, which on the surface that seems like a great idea. Like, why not? Well, the problem was then there became this competition where the band became negligent with their duties and commitment to Shama as a worship band, and they started thinking, "Hey, we're great. We're so wonderful. We're going to go out and do this thing for God. We don't need them. They need us because we're so awesome." And so then they formed a band and changed their name. And there'd be times that when we'd have a Shama service, oh, we can't. The band would say, "Oh, we can't do that because we have a gig booked." So they went from being a worship band, which is a high honor, you're leading people into the presence of God, to pretending to be about worship when really it was about entertainment, by forming their own little rock band to develop a following that was real fun when all the pretty girls would ooh and ooh, I love that band. And you see this. And it's not about the presence of God, it's about goosebumps and excitement and hormones and those kinds of things. You just pretend it's about God. No, it's really about entertainment. People don't go to see a rock band to experience the presence of God. They go to be entertained. That's a fact. So you might experience the presence of God at a rock show, but understand you didn't go there for the presence of God. You went there to be entertained. And that's the little thing. When you're a worshiper, it's not about entertainment, it's about glorifying God. So, and that's always the higher calling. It's not wrong to be an entertainer, just know you're an entertainer. But what happened is this neglected principle of cover and move began to this band that was once a worship team that God was using, stepped out from under that anointing and thought that they were so anointed, they began to become these rock stars. Well, here's the thing. Every person save one backslid that was in that band because they neglected that their responsibility to cover and move. They neglected to cover fire for the minister. They go out and each individually, yes, they stood before people. They seemed to be making a difference, but guess what? Because they were doing their own thing off on their own, they got attacked by the enemy. Uh, Members got divorced. Members totally backslid, went out into the world. And if they died today, they go to hell. One member got excommunicated from the church. A guy on the cover of their CD that was reading the Bible, this inspirational image. He's not even serving God today. He chased after a woman and got lost. Almost everything about this effort fell apart because they neglected the larger mission of the church to go launch their own ministry, and because they weren't graced to go do that thing on their own, and because of an experience thinking that they're so great, they neglected the team and they fell. Almost all of them. Only one of them is serving God strong today. But in that season, it was probably, from my observance as a pastor, his coldest season spiritually of his life, clouded by a lot of confusion. Anyway, why? No principle of cover and move. Instead of how can I help the ministry? How can we advance the kingdom? It became about how can I advance myself? And it fell apart. None of those people are doing anything significant for God today except for one. Principle of cover and move. Another example is, and I'm also in church administration. We've had in the past, we've had individuals on staff that were kind of control freaks, that this is my territory, nobody else can do it because they won't do it right. And always a martyr. Oh, my job's harder than everybody else. The problem is nobody could help them because nobody could do it like they could. And what eventually happened, this employee in the past, we've had many people struggle with this over the years, and it's an easy trap to get into. This person self-destructed. They fell apart. They had to be let go, and there was a bunch of unnecessary offense. It never should have gotten to that point where they were so stressed out and such need for help, and they're like, nobody's helping me. The irony is they wouldn't let anybody help them because they made it about them instead of sharing the load and recognizing I have a team. There's other people around me that need stuff to do. I can relinquish some of that control so that other people can get involved, so that they can grow and so they can get better, and we can all help each other. But this person just focused on themselves, they self-destructed. There's been times where we've had ministry departments that began to take the whole focus of the church's energy and finances and all things. And not that that ever fully happened, but there are times where a certain ministry department that was not really the vision of the senior pastor. It was just it was another ministry that just kind of at the time was being driven by another person, and it was a little off track. And so then you have this tail wagging the dog thing where this ministry that's really there's almost too much energy being put into it because there's other ministries that needed attention, began to be a drain on finances, began to be a drain on the staff, and those types of things. And the tail began to wag the dog. Sometimes you got to step back and say, is the thing that I'm doing, is it worth the energy that's being depleted to make it happen at the expense of these other more fruitful areas of ministry? Sometimes as a smaller platoon or a smaller company within the larger regiment, you have to reevaluate. Is someone else, is another company, is another group within the larger group being more fruitful, that I would be better off supporting them than pulling from their time and resources to help me? And so, because when you are willing to do that and you're willing to move within inside and outside departments to help the larger group, then everybody becomes more successful, and everybody gets to go to the strengths and not focus on weaknesses. And it's just a better scenario. That's, again, some examples of cover and move. Personal example of a time when I was not applying this principle. When I first started Shama, I was 19 years old, many years ago, before some of you were born. And I had a really high standard because I was a very driven person and expectation. I immediately formed this leadership team around me, right? And then I was quickly frustrated thinking, oh, we're calling them leaders, but they're not doing much. And so then I set this high bar. You're going to be at early morning prayer all these mornings. Well, early morning prayer, most people, if you have early morning prayer, it's only like the Navy SEALs that would show up to the spiritual Navy SEALs that show up to early morning prayer. Because even if you say all of you come, people start dropping out because that's a higher level of discipline, especially with a barely college age ministry with a leader that's barely out of teens himself, putting this high demand. Everybody's going to show up to early morning prayer, 5 days a week or whatever it was. I don't remember now. And I got irritated because people wouldn't show up. I got irritated because there were events that needed planned and people would drop the ball. Oops, I didn't show up. I had work. Or, oh, yeah, somebody's in town and so I couldn't go. And so they would drop the ball and everything would get messed up. Well, rather than working with that person, training that person, holding their hand, walking them through those things, helping them get discipled, because obviously not everybody's at the same level. You can't put unreasonable expectations on a person. You can't just dump something on somebody and then blame them later if they didn't do a good job. If you didn't take any time investing energy into developing that person, you have to give them some room to fail, but you can't just give them the whole thing and walk away. That's not good leadership. So anyway, I got frustrated with them, and I just fine. I'll do it myself. And so I started like, nah, you're not a leader anymore. Nah, you're not a leader anymore. You guys don't do anything. You don't show up to early morning prayer. And I got mad. And so I just kind of started, nah, you're not much of a leader. Never mind. And so what happened then is I went by myself in my own strength and started doing some of these things that they weren't doing because I was irritated with them and how slow and inefficient and sloppy and lazy and undisciplined and unreliable, all those things that were irritating. Rather than help them become a better person, I just said, fine, I don't need you. Well, what happened is I ended up getting pretty worn down. The ministry stopped growing. So that didn't help. Um, and all those people that I got irritated with, well, then they became even less invested. Because they're less invested, they don't even, not only could I not rely on them for much, well, now they're doing even less. So sometimes it's better to see the bigger picture and to think about the other people, to not try and go alone, and understand it is frustrating to work with people, but it's worth it because you're developing as a team. You're not just developing individually. I learned that the hard way. And here's the thing that stops people from thinking team wise and just thinking it's all about them. But asking for help makes more work for myself. Guess what? Yep, it does. Asking for help makes more work for yourself. And I'll give you an example of that. I have 4 daughters. One of them is possibly going through this right now. But each of them, my wife has trained them and put an expectation on them to do chores. That has been a pain in the booty at times because you ask them to wash dishes, they don't do it right. You know, dirty, the stuff isn't clean the way it's supposed to. Stuff gets left in the sink. You ask them to sweep, and there's piles of dust still around because they miss things, or they didn't. You ask them to dust, and they don't dust things they're supposed to. It would be way easier in some regard to just do the work ourselves and not invest energy into training them because they didn't start out good. But guess what? That consistent practice, that consistent expectation, that consistent training that they got from their mother. This is how you do this. This is how you do this, even though they failed over and over and over and over again, that they became very good workers, in different areas, but they developed life skills and got better so that there's times where we can lean on them for things that we wouldn't be able to if we hadn't invested that time into training them. So in the long run, it was, even though it was harder to not just say, I'll just do it myself. Even though it was harder, in the long run, it becomes easier because you're investing in the team and not just yourself. And you can't win the game as an individual. You need a team. So invest in the people around you. Cover and move. All right. Another thing, another experience from Shama days, and something that would happen. People would be in Shama. Nobody remembers my ministry. Nobody remembers what I'm involved. Nobody sees what Shama's doing, and they would say those things. And guess what? In any department that you work for, any area you work for, anything you do for God, anything you do in the church, anything you do for God, there are times where you feel like, I am so alone, nobody appreciates what I'm doing. That is the wrong focus, and that's an individualistic mindset. Here's the truth. Part of the reason you get missed, part of the reason nobody knows what you're doing and the sacrifice you're making, maybe you're too involved with your ministry, and maybe you need to get your ministry involved with the bigger ministry. Instead of, when is Cornerstone, the church, going to recognize what Regiment is doing? When are they going to see it? Well, how about Regiment recognize the bigger picture of the church, and Regiment serve the bigger ministry, and guess what? They'll get recognition. And that principle applies everywhere. Here's another thing. You feel like nobody recognizes you, nobody appreciates you. Another thing is, maybe you aren't asking for help and you aren't offering it. So, principle of cover and move. You're remembering there's more people than just you. You're asking for help when you need to ask for help. Instead of just tackling a project, I'm going to do this myself. Who out there can I involve in this so that we as a team can do this better? I mean, isn't it better to have someone doing cover fire while you're changing position versus, I don't want to ask for help. I'm just going to run out there and hope I don't get shot. It's the principle of cover and move. Another example, Deborah and Barak in the book of Judges. were heroes in Israel. Deborah was a prophetess. Barak was a military strategist, a commander of an army. They each used each other's strength, in other words, in a way to overthrow their enemies. That Deborah gave spiritual uh, wisdom to Barak in conducting the battle and in relaying what God's saying. Barak gave the practical side as a military strategist with Deborah, and together they did what they couldn't do on their own. I'm just going to give you some quotes from Jocko Willink. He was a retired Navy SEAL platoon commander, that he talks about this principle in the laws of combat. He says, in an example, he says, it was foolishness not to work together. Though we were working in small teams with some distance between us, we weren't on our own. We were all trying to accomplish the same mission. The enemy was out there working against us, all of us. It was essential that we support each other and work together. One element must cover so that the other element could move. That applies to the church. Here's another thing he said. It was a rude awakening for me. I had become so immersed in the details, decision points, and immediate challenges of my own team that I had forgotten about the other team, what they could do for us, and how we might help them. That's a mindset you need to have, because when you're fighting a battle on the front line, you can forget that there's a greater war going on. Sometimes you need to step back and recognize that so that you survive. He said this as well. Often, when smaller teams within the team get so focused on their immediate tasks, they forget about what others are doing or how they depend on other teams. It falls on leaders to continually keep perspective on the strategic mission and remind the team that they're part of the greater team and the strategic mission is paramount. These individuals and teams must instead find a way to work together, communicate with each other, and mutually support one another. The focus must always be on how to best accomplish the mission. Those are some great points. Work together, communicate with each other, mutually support one another. And the focus is on how we can all best accomplish the mission. Anyway, that's the principles of